Thank you, Agneta, and thank you, Matti, and thanks to all of you who want to celebrate that I am retiring. A few days ago, Agneta asked me if I could, in no more than 30 minutes, tell you what I have done at KTH. I was stupid enough to say, of course. But how do you summarize a whole working life in 30 minutes? I got an idea. And I checked it out with Agneta last Friday. She said, great. Said and done. I went down to the basement, brought up a moving box containing old papers and magazines. And this weekend, I made a very nostalgic trip. Now I will share some of the clippings with you. The first clipping is from 1973, telling that the first engineers focusing on business economy were about to leave KTH. You can see Professor Albert Danielsson in the back to the right. We were 13 students. I'm in the back row to the left, who became a very tight group. And we still are. However, focus on business economy, as the article said, was partly a lie. INDEC was established to teach engineering students scientific management. The first professor, Taras Selfors, whose portrait you can still see in Matti's room, used to work as a consultant, implementing time and motion studies in Swedish industry. Still, when I was a student, INDEC was called Industrial Engineering in English, not Industrial Economics and Management. And I was certainly trained to become a production engineer. However, when I graduated, scientific management and piece rate systems were questioned. Many companies had problems recruiting, and they had issues with sick leave and quality issues. So they started to move against autonomous group and more flow orientation in production. My first job after my master's degree was as a PhD candidate. I joined a research group at INDEC, influenced by socio-technical theory. We worked action-oriented in two companies, Åkers Styckebruk and Husqvarna, who implemented autonomous groups. Already then, I learned to know Thomas Sandberg, who worked at Salabacke-tvätten in Uppsala. The changes in production management also heavily affected a training institute, Ali Rati. Ali stands for Arbetsledarinstitutet and Rati for Rationaliseringstekniska institutet. Ali Rati was a part of the Swedish Employers Confederation, SAF. When piece rate systems were abandoned, Ali Rati lost a monopoly to sell compulsory training to all production engineers in Swedish industry. Former profits turned into heavy losses. I was employed by Ali Rati in 1975 to develop new profitable courses in production management. First as project manager and later as director, with 18 people, most of them twice my age, reporting to me. For 5 years, I initiated and developed new courses and wrote textbooks on production management. I also learned to know many plant and production managers in Swedish industry. In parallel, I was still teaching production management at INDEC, and I stayed as a PhD candidate. Understanding the background to Giertz was my new research field. To put it simply, my research question was, how the heck could work studies become compulsory in Swedish industry? Later, in the beginning of 1981, I answered that question in my doctoral thesis. I was number 6 to graduate as a doctor at INDEC. I had to dig far back to get the answer. The first collective agreement in Sweden was set in 1905. It was decided on minimum wages for metal workers, but it also included a paragraph saying that all supervisors must, as an option to the fixed pay per hour, offer each worker a piece rate. In most companies, the piece rate system initially made workers earn much more than the hourly pay. However, during the deep depression after World War I, many companies lowered the piece rates. Workers, as well as the union, complained. After a lot of infighting, the labor court in Sweden in 1944 finally decided on a completely new and compulsory piece rate system. Supervisors should no more negotiate with workers on piece rates. Instead, work-study engineers should objectively decide how many minutes a certain job should take. In 1948, the parties also agreed that the Employers' Confederation should execute the training in work studies. I had found the answer to my research question, why Giertz was born. Consequently, the former work organization was banned and replaced by another. Thousands of work-study engineers were trained and installed all over the Swedish manufacturing industry. The productivity in manual work definitely improved. Personally, I'm also convinced that it contributed to the competitiveness of Swedish export companies during the 50s and 60s. In 1980, SAF made an organizational change. Giertz was turned into a subsidiary, Managementgruppen, AB. And I stayed inside SAF and moved to a new department. In those days, many forces in society wanted to stop or stall computerization and automation. Different committees and delegations with representatives from employers, unions, and authorities were set up. My task as an employee at SAF was to show that early adoption of new technology was vital to the competitiveness of our industry. Automation initiated changes in industry, and my new task also started to move my academic focus away from socio-technical theory and towards automation. After my PhD, I left SAF to start my own consultancy company, Industriekonomi Erik Giertz AB. My most important customer in the beginning was Volvo Components in Skövde and Köping. And I spent many lonely nights in small hotel rooms. Especially remember a small hotel, Prisma, just outside the gate to Volvo in Skövde. I got a lot of time to read and write in my hotel room, which I did with a pencil and a rubber in my hand. I wrote many reports on behalf of other customers, like SAF, white-collar and blue-collar unions, public authorities, and ministries. In my reports, I said that automation and new technology was going to turn the technical organization in engineering companies upside down. It was no more a question of just designing new products into a manual production with unskilled labor. Instead, you had to design new products, new information systems, as well as new manufacturing systems, which in turn had to be operated by people with more technical skills. I wrote reports on behalf of the Employers' Federation, 2 different white-collar unions, and the Metal Worker Union. The reports were hot stuff in a general discussion on automation and work organization, and especially in an intense debate on how the unions should be organized and negotiate in the future. In 1986, I was contracted by the graphic industry, both employers and unions. Grafiska arbetsgivareförbundet, Grafiska fackförbundet, Svenska industritjänstemannaförbundet och Sveriges arbetsledareförbund. They wanted me to make an analysis of the ongoing turbulence in their industry. I, in my turn, contacted Göran Reitberger, who is not here today, I think. Together, we made a profound quantitative and qualitative analysis, which in 1987 was published as a report and later also as a more popular book. To me, as a business consultant, the report also was a ticket to new customers in a very turbulent industry. However, still my most important customers were engineering companies. But from 1987, Volvo changed to Scania. Scania gave me many different assignments and I learned to know the company quite well. When Scania turned 100 in 1991, I also wrote a book. Later, the book about Scania was followed by other business biographies. When the Scania book was published, Albert called me and said, "Eric, you have done enough research and publishing after your doctor's degree to become a docent." I applied, and John Forslin, who had to read my application, approved. I was appointed in 1992, and I got new contacts at Indec. I learned to know and appreciate many young PhD candidates. Mats Engvall, Henrik Blomgren, Bosse Karlsson, Magnus Anniander, Jacob Gramenius, and others. Towards the end of the 1980s, outsourcing of services as well as manufacturing increased. Large incumbents moved off the departments into new subsidiaries called Assist AB, Partner AB, Data AB, or Component AB. Sometimes those companies later were acquired by specialized service companies, ICT companies, or contract manufacturers. This new trend immediately was changing my assignments as a consultant. Suddenly, they were all about structural changes, divesting, mergers and acquisitions. For a while, I was even contracted by Scania to manage Scania Data AB. Do you remember, Leif? In 1989, the wall to Eastern Europe also came down. Almost instantaneously, offshoring of labor-intensive manufacturing was on the agenda in most manufacturing companies. Not only my assignments, but also my academic interest turned towards industrial dynamics, outsourcing and offshoring. During the 1990s, I also received more assignments from various service companies, retailers, banks, teleoperators, ICT companies, FM companies, training companies, and so on. I also entered the board of directors in a handful of companies, and I became a partner and the chairman of two ICT-related new ventures. Working in different industries made it obvious to me that successful management principles and success factors differ in different industries. It is great differences between managing a steel mill, an assembly line, a consultancy organization, a retail store, or a call center. A job I made for the union Ledarna in 1992, actually for Rune Forslund sitting over there, made me an opportunity to dig deeper into this. Ledarna would no longer negotiate salaries. They wanted to teach their members in different business logics to measure improvements and thus increase their earnings. I wrote some books and reports on business logics and some statistics during the 90s. In 1999, I published a business logics model, including 21 different business logics in 6 main categories. The finalizing job was done in close contact with a project called To Create New Jobs at Rådet för arbetslivsforskning, RALF. The interest in my business logics model also made the authority Nutec finance a first quantitative analysis of how the employment in different business logics has developed in Sweden over time, since 1970. Ralph also decided to finance a part-time adjunct professorship at INDEC for me during 6 years. The idea was that I should increase the knowledge about successful management principles, primarily within the service sector. I spent more time at KTH, and it didn't take long until the president at KTH in those days, Anders Flodström, approached me. He wanted to know if it was a good idea to start an executive MBA at KTH. And I was contracted by him to give him an answer. After interviewing around 70 executives in Swedish industry, my answer was a definite no. Starting an executive MBA at KTH is not a good idea. But there was most definitely a need for programs in business development addressing more adult executives in technology-based companies. That was the starting point of KTH Executive School. And of course, the end of my career as a business consultant. I was employed as the first MD in January 2001. The first program was to start in August, and I actually see some of the participants here today. Utsi Birk from De Laval, who developed the first robotic milking systems, Martin Stålberg from Scania, and Lena Mortensson down there, and you, JR, was on the second program, right? When we started off in January, I was convinced that we should get enough participants to start in August. During the fall, Ericsson said that they wanted to send at least 10 participants. Martin, how many participants were there from Ericsson?
None.
Yes, none. Ericsson was very close to bankruptcy. And I remember calling Leif in June, walking on the cliffs at my country house and begging him for more participants. Yeah, I'll see to it, he said, right? Executive School develops different programs for different business logics. The first program only gathered participants from manufacturing companies. It was soon followed by other programs addressing consultancy companies, companies in infra-service industries, or fast-growing technology-based companies. Towards the end of 2005, Anders Flodström contacted me once again. He wanted me as vice president at KTH, responsible for business liaison. I accepted. Consequently, in 2006, Fredrik Lagergren took over as MD in Executive School, and I was the chairman of Executive School as well as KTH Holding. I stayed on as vice president for 5 years, and I took on the responsibility for KTH Business Liaison. It was an intense period in which I learned a lot about how universities in general, and KTH in particular, interacts with society and industry, and how KTH, in the dynamic business world of today, contributes to more competitive industries in Sweden. I was appointed visiting professor at INDEC in 2008, but it was not until 2011, I joined you full time. As you know, I have lately focused a lot on quantitative and qualitative analysis of structural changes in different industries in Sweden. My focus is on industrial dynamics in Swedish industrial and political history. And you can be sure, now when I retire, I will stop looking into the future. I will only look backwards, and I will stick around, telling you all the time that it was better before. Thank you for listening, and see you all tomorrow.